Well, good morning or good afternoon, whatever the case may be, depends on when you're here during the day. We're going to pick up just real briefly, got a couple of other things we're going to talk about. And then the National Park Service has a pretty decent little video about the Trail of Tears, which we'll talk about today. And you'll also have the opportunity to watch the video. So let's just continue where we picked up yesterday. We'd been talking about the Creek Indians, the Creek Nation, and how they were pushed out of Georgia really by 1827. A year later, the Cherokee are thriving. They are an advanced society. They are doing well. Everybody's living in harmony until the bell rings and gold is discovered. And because that gold is discovered, Cherokee land becomes very desirable. And thousands of white settlers begin to push into Cherokee territory in order to mine the gold. Now, unfortunately for most people involved, the Cherokees suffer. The miners, for the most part, do not get rich because the only people who get rich during a gold rush are the people that are selling supplies to the miners. That was true in Georgia. It was true in California. It was true in Alaska. And I suppose it's still true today if there were to be a gold rush. Excuse me. So that's what's going on. In 1828, this man to the right is the governor of Georgia. His name is George Gilmer. And Gilmer declares that Georgia state law is in effect in the Cherokee Nation. The only problem with that is that in 1791, George Washington signed a treaty with the Cherokee Nation guaranteeing them their sovereignty and the United States protection. George Gilmer actually breaks that treaty. He goes against what General Washington, President Washington, had put into effect. 1830, President Andrew Jackson, and he's an interesting guy, very backwoods, kind of a hero of the War of 1812 that we'll talk about a little later. He signs into law the Indian Removal Act. And what the Indian Removal Act did is it required all Indians living east of the Mississippi River to move to reservations west of the Mississippi River. And it creates an area called really the Indian Territory. And we'll talk more about that as we talk about some things that lead up to the Civil War. So Andrew Jackson is, he's not my favorite president. I don't know that he's anybody's favorite president. He's an interesting guy, but he's also very racist toward not only blacks living in America at the time, but also toward Native Americans. He wants to rid the nation of Indians. He wants to rid the United States of Native Americans, and he does his best. Cherokee Nation, unlike the Creek Nation, doesn't take up arms. They don't go to war, at least not in the conventional sense. They go to war in a different way. They go to war with their intellect, with the court system. They use the court system to go to war against the United States and against Georgia. After the gold is discovered in 1828, Governor Gilmer, wants all Cherokee to swear allegiance to the state of Georgia. And really, in doing that, to swear allegiance to the United States. Well, there were people who counseled them not to do that. One of those was Reverend Samuel Worcester. He himself refused to take the oath. Even though he was not Cherokee, he refused to take the oath, swearing allegiance to the state of Georgia, and he encouraged the Cherokee to do the same thing. Well, Worcester and Other missionaries were arrested. They are tried and they are convicted of violating Georgia state law and encouraging the natives to do the same thing. Um, Now, Worcester wasn't just sent to jail, he was sentenced to hard labor um, for a crime that really didn't warrant that. They were trying to make an example of him. Worcester appeals to the United States Supreme Court because that's what people do. It becomes known as the case of Worcester versus Georgia. John Ross, who's one of the chiefs of the Cherokee Nation, argues before the the U.S. Supreme Court that Governor Gilmer and the Georgia General Assembly had violated the 1791 U.S. Treaty with the Cherokee Nation. Did they? Shake your head up and down. Yes, they did. I mean, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that they had violated that treaty that George Washington had signed. And so the U.S. Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Marshall, sides with the Cherokee and says that Georgia laws are not valid in the Cherokee Nation, in the Cherokee Territory. Andrew Jackson basically ignores the Supreme Court. He says of Chief Justice John Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall has made his ruling. Let's see him try to enforce it. And of course, he can't. That's not the purpose of the Supreme Court. Supreme Court does not enforce law, it interprets law. And their interpretation was, yes, the treaty had been violated. So Jackson ignores the Supreme Court and orders the Indian Removal Act to be enforced. 1838, 14,000 Cherokee are forced to move west to what is modern day Oklahoma through the to the Indian Territory. Native Americans, the Cherokee, began to call this the Trail of Tears. Now, it's not the only Trail of Tears. Remember, all Native Americans east of the Mississippi have to move west of the Mississippi. And so there are several cases where they are forcibly marched to that area. Some go voluntarily, but most are forced marched to it. It's November, it's cold, and roughly 4,000 people die from disease, exposure to the cold, hunger. They're not ready to make that trek. They're not ready to make that trip. Roughly 700, 800 of them escape and hide in the mountains of North Georgia and Tennessee and North Carolina, and they form what today is the Cherokee Nation, the eastern tribe of the Cherokee Nation. The western tribe, of course, is west of the Mississippi. So the Trail of Tears is really kind of the culminating event in this problem of the Native American and white settlers. What happens? As you study U.S. history, you'll see that there were many different plans for dealing with the Indians. One of them was to coexist, and I think that's what George Washington was in favor of. But unfortunately, Washington dies and is not able to stop the removal of Native Americans, the Cherokee and the Creek, from Georgia. This is in North Georgia at New Echota, and it's that New Echota Treaty of 1835 that the Cherokee Indians signed, the chiefs signed, because they don't really have any choice. Some leave after that is signed. Others become part of what we call the Trail of Tears. All right, I think there's a little video hiding behind here. So let's see. And again, we're going to have a longer one, so don't know that you'll get to watch this. So that's over because I don't think y'all are going to get anything out of that. So let's get Nana to turn on this little video from the National Park Service. It's actually pretty good and gives you a better understanding of the Trail of Tears. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you paid attention. You got the rest of your notes. Don't forget, as you can see on the board behind me, right up there, your test on westward expansion and Indian removal will be next Thursday, so we get that done before Thanksgiving. And when we come back from Thanksgiving, we'll look at some events that lead up to the American Civil War. And then when we come back in January, we'll spend a good bit of time looking at the Civil War itself, particularly in Georgia and Georgia's role in the Civil War, why it was so important. So have a good day, and I will see you on Friday.